We are talking to Larry Williams of Tiger Illustrated, which is part of the Rivals.com network. He is what I would consider the senior writer extraordinaire, along with his cohort, Paul Strelo, who owns the recruiting beat on the Tigers. How has it been covering a team that is now 5-5 over its last 10 games? I'm sure it's a little different.
Yeah, it's been bizarre. I mean, of course, in 2021, it's not like this year they just dropped off a cliff. I mean, they kind of dropped off a cliff in 2021 first. So we've had some preparation. I guess they started 8-0 last year before they started to take on water. But yeah, it's been I think just a lot of I don't know, a lot of questions, a lot of explanations. I don't think there's one answer to it. I think a lot of boxes have been checked that have sort of contributed to their decline. But I still think there's hope they can turn things around this year because they're not that far off. It's just I guess to go back to what I started with, it's just been such a strange sight seeing so many of the detail things that are sort of not being covered, because it used to be the detail things that the other teams tended to flub in big moments, not to bring up a bad memory for NC State fans, but the 2016 missed field goal, you think back to that same season against Louisville, James Quick mysteriously running out of bounds, at the end, where it's like, what is he doing? And so we've seen of late, it seems like we've seen a lot of those moments on Clemson's side. Like, what is he doing? Well, I can't believe I just saw that. So it's taken some getting used to see it on this side.
Well, for some reason, part of my memory kind of goes back to when Kyle Parker was quarterback and how fast things can change, because I remember being down there, pretty sure it was at Clemson, 14-13.
Yeah.
Clemson won, I believe. Neither team could really move the ball. I'm sure Russell Wilson was probably the quarterback for NC State. I remember the Wolfpack got to the 43-yard line or so, and it was like 4th and short, and Tom O'Brien punted. And he defended it vociferously in the post-game press conference, but I was like, man, you're not crossing midfield much. Here you have. You might want to go for it, but then Chad Morris gets hired, and Sammy Watkins comes, and Taj Boyd picks his third college in recruiting and ends up blossoming, and all these things kind of come together, and then next, Clemson becomes Clemson. It's probably too quick for a new offensive coordinator to turn things around maybe that fast this year. But what would you see? What do you think are what would be the plans, I guess, to get Clemson offense to be back to Clemson? Because I don't think the defense is probably the problem, right? I mean, maybe get a kicker, but, well, you got a great kicker coming with Nolan Hauser from Huff High School in the Charlotte area. But, it's pretty much comes down to offense, right?
Pretty much. I mean, the defense did stay on the field for 9 minutes, and Miami's possession that stretched from late third quarter to fourth quarter. That was a little jarring to see. Everybody, I mean, even Mario Cristobal said, everybody in the stadium knew what we were going to do. And so it is different to see, that from an opposing offense. But you can also make the argument that, if had Clemson's offense taking care of business, then Clemson's defense wouldn't have been put in that type of spot, where it gets tired and all that. So yes, I think starts with the offense. I think, if you want to be realistic about it, I mentioned earlier, there's been all sorts of, I guess, reckoning and questions about, well, how did they fall, this far? And, people are coming to terms with the fact that, okay, not every 5-star quarterback is going to be Deshaun Watson or Trevor Lawrence. Not every, you're not going to have T. Higgins and Justin Ross and Mike Williams and Amari Rogers walking through that door every year, around the same, or being a part of in such a short amount of time, being a part of the program in that short amount of time. Travis Etienne was, a generational playmaker. I think going back to realistically, you have to get better on the offensive line. Do they have problems elsewhere? Of course they do. Cade Klubnik is still sort of growing into the role of as the starter, learning how to play in a composed manner. But that's probably natural, and that's probably the norm for even a 5-star quarterback who has 8 starts under his belt, right? So, as I look back, you mentioned Garrett Riley, and is it realistic to expect, or is it unrealistic to think that they're going to just take off right away?
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure that was the preseason hope
Yeah, it was, and
or hype.
yeah, it was, and hand raised. I thought they'd be significantly better on offense.
We're living the same thing because NC State brought in their offensive coordinator.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
reunited him with Brennan Armstrong, and that was 6 months of offensive coordinator to quarterback hype.
Yep, hand raised there too, because I thought the reuniting of he and Armstrong was going to be a game changer. But anyway, I went back this week and watched some of TCU's stuff from last year, including their semifinal win over Michigan. You hear, there are a lot of I guess, sort of emotional conclusions recently of Clemson fans I've heard. They've said this doesn't look anything like the TCU offense. They're not running the same scheme, and Dabo's calling all the plays and this and that. If you go back and watch TCU last year, I see a lot of the same stuff that Clemson is trying to do. But what I see that is the biggest difference, the two biggest differences: one, TCU had a big, veteran, experienced offensive line that created a consistent running game, and it protected Max Duggan. And they also had, number two, in Max Duggan, a battle-hardened, veteran, physical quarterback who could make the throws and who could stick his nose in there and plow for yardage, almost like Tim Tebow. Clemson doesn't have either one of those right now, and I think that's the biggest difference.
I mean, Max Duggan was better as a senior than he was as a sophomore.
Exactly.
Crazy.
And so
that's crazy.
Going to something Dabo Swinney said earlier this week. He's like, sort of looking long term. He said Cade Klubnik's got to get bigger and stronger during the off season. And when you go and look at TCU, you can really see, I mean, your quarterback during sometimes when the games are on the line, sometimes he's got to be that guy with the ball in his hands. And not that Klubnik hasn't made things happen with his legs. He certainly has. But he's just kind of frail, I guess, for a college quarterback who's going to naturally take a beating when when you're running the ball as much as he does. And so I go back to being realistic, and I think it's realistic to look at Clemson's offensive line and say, man, they should be better. I think it's realistic to look at Cade Klubnik and say, this guy's gonna be better later in his career as he develops, not just mentally but physically as well.
I told this to Paul Strillo at the time, and I couldn't tell you what year it was, but Klubnik was on a Fox Sports Net Southwest title game against Quinn Ewers. So at the time, Quinn Ewers was God's gift to the quarterback position. Everybody's number one. Everyone wanted him. Klubnik was known, had some nice offers, but nowhere near the blow up. And, obviously Ewers picks Ohio State, reclasses, goes a year early, transfers back to Texas. But, Klubnik later, maybe, I don't know, we'll say 4 or 5 months later, then it took off in terms of, recruiting hype and whatnot. But what he did incredibly well in that state title game, beating Ewers, was the read option. He really ran the read option well, and whether keeping it himself or doing different things, had a nice arm, nice feel for himself. So that's why when Clemson finally jumped in, because they were a little later, I think, I was like, okay, I get why Clemson would want Klubnik. Now I as a sophomore, I see a guy who's close but not there yet. But I also see a guy that, if he had DeAndre Hopkins or Sammy Watkins or Amari Rogers or even an Artavis Scott or Cornell Powell, his job would be a lot easier. I do think, and it was asked of Dave Doran today as a mini press conference, the tight end could be a problem and was a problem last year, and obviously is coming off of a very big game against Miami. So there are some potential weapons. And then, of course, the joke in Raleigh has always been that, Will Shipley and his 26 or 27 NC State family members that graduate, 27 family members that graduated from NC State, he's always going to want to play his best against the Wolfpack. But, is there a point total that you've thought about this year where it's like, if they get to that total combined with the defense, they should win?
Oh, Lord, JC.
I
remember.
State, I always thought around 28-31.
Yeah.
Because of the defense. The defense usually is stingy.
Yeah.
I just don't think State could get it. It'd be quite an achievement for State's offense, because other than the VMI and Marshall game, there's not been a lot of games of high scoring.
Yeah, I usually, I usually don't go into a game thinking in those terms precisely.
That might be like more of a coaching thing, maybe.
Yeah, I think back to, obviously, when in their losses this year, they scored 7 against Duke, 24 against Florida State, and then 20, actually 17 in regulation against Miami.
Yeah.
This offense is averaging in ACC play, 5 ACC games, 19 points a game. They averaged 36 last year in ACC play. So as much as I guess as easy as it is to look back at last year's Clemson offense and say, oh God, they were just god awful and they really needed a reboot. Well, statistically, they improved a lot from 2021, and obviously statistically better than what we've seen so far this year. So I just, this season has just been so wacky. And I don't mean to say that it's been all bad luck. I mean, I know Dabo Swinney sort of couches it as that. But I really don't. I think it's just a matter of detail stuff that when it goes uncovered, you see weird stuff happen. You could argue they were fortunate against Miami that they didn't have the safety called, right? And if the refs call that a safety, then maybe it doesn't even go into overtime because you lose in regulation.
I still don't understand how it wasn't a safety.
Yeah, I don't either. Or Shipley's fumble in the end zone. Williams, the safety, could have picked it up and darted 100 yards the other way for a touchdown because it was still a live ball. My dog is kind of going crazy over here. If that interferes with the,
I don't hear it. And
okay, good.
We're big dogs.
Well, we're going. I'm sorry, I'm talking in circles, but my long-winded answer to that is so many wacky things have happened with block field goals and all this and that it's hard for me to really go into a game thinking, okay, if they score this, I think they'll be okay. It's just been one of those just wild turns. Clemson's they're up 17-7 against Florida State after a touchdown late in the first half, and Dabo is on the sidelines in the face of the defense saying, we need the ball, let's get a 3 and out. And then we're going to we're going to drop the hammer on these guys and go up 24-7. Well, then Florida State goes right down the field against basically prevent defense and scores a touchdown, make it 17-14. Well, then later, of course, the big moment in that game was Clemson's trying to go up double digits or 2 scores in the third quarter, and is starting to run the ball effectively against Florida State. And then Cade Klubnik drops back to pass, is looking to his left, and Phil Maffa is can't see a defensive back blitzing from about 20 yards out, and forces a fumble, and it gets taken back the other way. So what I'm looking for, I've sort of been trained to look for going into each game this year, is just, okay, can they just do the rudimentary things right? And is this game gonna go by with them not doing something that I'm like, what in the world did I just see? And that applies to the defense as well. Like, JC, they came up with a stop with 2 minutes left in regulation on an incomplete pass to the end zone. That was when Miami ended up kicking the game tying field goal. Nate Wiggins is taunting the other receiver after the incomplete pass. It really should have drawn a penalty.
Saw that he had teammates and people trying to pull him away.
I couldn't believe it. And I mean, we were this close from spending this week, instead of talking about what happened on the last play when Cade Klubnik, I guess, went rogue and didn't hand the ball off, we would have spent this whole week talking, oh my gosh, they lost because their defensive back lost his mind after coming up with a third down stop. And so it's just, sorry, I'm rambling, but
oh, you're fine.
It's been pretty wild.
I not that you have to go into it. I do find it fascinating that they were quick to let everybody know that Klubnik went rogue, and it made me think, because I don't know if coaches would have done that 5 years ago or 10 years ago. It just you don't hear stories about players who should have passed or should have run or should have done this. Maybe they just eat it and move it on. But I was like, wow, that was pretty quick to let everybody know that Klubnik was supposed to hand the ball off. But maybe that's just 2023.
Well, an interesting there are a few interesting dynamics there, layers to that. Number one, he never skewered DJ Uiagalelei publicly like that. I don't know if DJ ever made that precise mistake or error, but DJ made a lot of boneheaded plays. I think that goes to show, in my estimation, it goes to show that DJ, he was trying to protect in a way, because DJ was going through a lot of personal family stuff back home. And I think he was much more guarded in his public criticism of him. So I think it could be viewed as a credit to Cade Klubnik and his sort of mental ability to take that. Another layer to that is, at the end of the Florida State game in overtime, they called an RPO on 3rd and 6 inches. And I mean, the obvious call or the obvious read was to hand the ball off. Well, Cade sees a matchup or a numbers matchup that he likes on the outside. Well, he pulls it and spits it out to Adam Randall. Well, there's no blocking, and it gets blown up for a no gain. Well, they end up losing the game. I mean, I'm sorry. Right after that play, Dabo is yelling at Cade and clearly saying, "Cade, is 1 yard. Hand the ball off." But that's the interesting context to me in the midst or the wake of what happened at Miami. And it's like, okay, if we take them at the explanations at face value, then I guess going into that final play during the timeout, it's all right, Cade, hand the ball off. Like, we're not going to get into a situation that we did at Florida State where there's some gray area there on which way you can go. But it still happened to where at some point Cade looked at the defense and liked what he saw. I mean, I really think Miami sort of baited him into sort of looking like the left side of their defense was wide open, but it really wasn't. So anyway, no, I don't know if that's 2023. I think Yeah, I would sort of chalk it up to Cade is a Dabo guy. He's a lifer, so to speak. He scrutinizes himself, and so I would my guess, my educated guess would be Dabo knows that Cade can handle that type of public criticism. And in fact, Cade has criticized himself on a number of occasions over the last month or so.
I'm gonna end this on a fun one. I don't know how often you get it, but one of the neat things that they always make sure to emphasize, Dave Doran is like 8th in tenure with 11 years under the belt, and right above him is Dabo, who I think they're including his interim year, which would give him 16, but 15 in terms of, I'm guessing, is fully in charge of the program. And you know, because I don't think expectations were overly high going into the season, and just people want things, when things don't go perfectly. How much do you get Dabo's in year 16, or things should be different because Dabo has had X amount of years where, you know, I've always maintained that Doran in year 11, that's just more of an achievement that you can survive that long at one school, because I don't think the job gets any easier. And then you throw in NAL and recruiting and everything that's changed. I mean, you think about all the times that Dabo had to reinvent the staff and the roster to get to 16 years. It's pretty impressive for any of these coaches that do it at one school for a very long period of time.
Yeah, I think in Dabo's case, it's much less. Come on, he's in his 15th year. I mean, it's more. Come on, this program was at the top of the college football world 3 years ago. Like he took them to the mountaintop. So it's not nearly in the conversation in the Clemson bubble. It's not nearly as much. Come on, this is his 15th year. When is he going to do it? I mean, he did it. For 6 straight years, and so I think the consternation much more centers on what happened, in the last 3 years, because if you go not necessarily to 18 when they last won it, but as of 19, they had won 29 straight games. As of October 20, exactly 3 years ago now, they were number one. LSU, which had won it all the previous year by beating Clemson, had fallen apart. Alabama was undefeated around that time, but they only sort of crystallized themselves as being like otherworldly great at the end of that year when they totally dusted Ohio State in the championship game. And so my point is, it's people are trying to figure out, what happened. And again, as I said at the beginning of this conversation, there are so many factors. You could almost argue it's a perfect storm of about 15 different factors, a number of which you could not anticipate back if you're sitting there about 3 years ago in 2020, because just NIL portal, all that stuff. Like, I guess you could anticipate it somewhat back then. I'm just saying, during their glory days, I mean, I remember sitting and being asked, like, "Hey, Larry, what do you think could derail this?" And my only answers were, "Well, if this run of generational quarterback somehow ends." But that was hard to envision because they had DJ Uiagalelei coming into the boat. He was a 5-star top-ranked quarterback.
Yeah.
Other possibilities were, well, okay, well, Georgia could really, some of these faded powers. Obviously, Georgia wasn't faded. I mean, they went to the playoff. They played for the national championship in 2017, so that's not fair. But Florida State, Tennessee, even South Carolina, in-state was just an absolute wreck. Not that they're really good right now, but they're more formidable, I think, than they were then. Obviously the Seminoles, just totally different than they were.
And
Texas,
that opened up the door for NC State for those couple of years where with Bradley Chubb and Naeem Hines and good receivers and
yeah.
Ryan Finley as well. That team could maybe challenge with Clemson because you didn't have Florida State running the table with Jameis Winston. they weren't quite the same. So
Yeah.
that opened up the door for the Wolfpack during that small window. Now I've said it on some Tiger Illustrated podcasts in the past. I think the recruiting misses at wide receiver have definitely affected, basically really since Justin Ross got hurt. That was kind of like the first brick of some, maybe showing some signs. you know obviously, like I mentioned before, when you have game breakers at receiver, all of a sudden the offense really perks up. But one thing, I think, having Doran in year 11 and having Dabo in year 16, what you would hope is maybe things change and you don't have Brent Venables and you lose offensive coordinators and players come and go, but you would think that they would know how to solve problems quicker than the coach who doesn't have that under their belt, who hasn't been at a school as long. So maybe Dave Doran will figure out the problems on offense this year quicker than a coach who doesn't have the same experience, or Dabo will figure out the things that are going on at Clemson quicker because he's been there so long. So that's kind of like how I come away with coaches that have been at a certain school a long time. And obviously the fact that Doran is 8th in the country with 11 years shows how tough it is to make
Wow.
it to 11 years at one school in today's era. And social media, I'm sure, has made it a lot different for coaches. And obviously now NAL and the transfer portal will make it even harder for coaches to want to be at a school for 10 years, probably, maybe, but we'll see. For Wolfpack fans that want to see your stuff online or on the socials, how would you like to promote some of your work this week?
Well, I am on Twitter at Larry Williams TI, and then my podcast, which is available on all the major platforms, is called the Clemson Dubcast. And actually, earlier today, just had a great conversation with former Tiger Eric McLean, who of course works for the ACC Network and ESPN, and wide-ranging conversation about his what it's like for him as a Clemson grad, former Clemson player who played for this head coach. What is it like when he has he has to go on camera and he has a microphone and he's frustrated and he has some questions and misgivings and criticisms about his former coach? Like, how do you handle that? So really cool stuff. Sort of digging beneath the surface there with Eric and his process, and then of course TigerIllustrated.com. That's where we are. That's the main. That's the big boat. So yeah, come on aboard, and we'll have plenty more analysis heading into Saturday.
Any musical tidbits of late?
Yeah, I'm in 2 bands. One of them is the Grateful Brothers, Grateful Dead Allman Brothers cover band, and that's a load of fun. We're playing in downtown Greenville a week from Friday. I think I got that right. A place called Swanson's. And then another band that I'm in, it's like a bluegrassy type of funky outfit. We're playing Friday night, tomorrow night, at Kite Hill in Clemson. So fun little diversion, creative outlet away from the sports writing thing that's brings me great joy. So, but I'm not quitting my day job anytime soon. So I love what I do, and on both counts.
Cool. Well, we appreciate taking some time, and it'll be interesting to see. Maybe first team to 21 points wins the game on on Saturday. But I think I don't know how the weather will be exactly on Saturday, but it's been very nice this week, and a 2:00 kickoff is a little different in Raleigh compared to say an 8:00 game or a 7:00 game, but should be good. And see where this goes, and appreciate taking your time.
Yeah, I'll just say this is, even though Clemson has won 16 out of the last 18 in the series. I mean, the rule of these games going in is there's been a lot of buzz for most of them, right? Like, including last year.
I'm not, players and coaches might look at it one way. I always viewed the Clemson game as the litmus test. Where is NC State compared to a top 10 team or a top 20 team? Where the pecking order. Because if you're going to be the best, you have to beat the best. So when it was Jameis Winston and Florida State humming along, or EJ Manuel at Florida State, and they were pretty good. I think they were good. The years are starting to roll by, but to me that was, they were, when they won, in the past, and combine that with the Bambard miss. I mean, these were major moments from the NC State side of the rivalry, where that, it was just a huge deal, sadness with the Bambard kick, exhilaration with winning in double overtime. That, and when they finally broke through, and, contrast with the hype of, I think last year, like that was a big deal going into that game. And, everything about last year was built up the entire offseason, where it's like old team, maybe not a team with NFL guys, but old team because of the extra COVID year, because the guys who redshirted or transferred and then redshirted, experience all over the place. A couple guys who didn't go to the NFL because of injuries, so they couldn't work out, so they had to come back to NC State, which was, in a roundabout way, kind of like what Peyton Wilson has gone through, who, one of the few players that Clemson really run after that's current on the current NC State roster. And Peyton is terrific. Well, 6-year guy. Makes a huge difference when you're 6th year compared to, say, if he was a 4th year, regular senior. So that was last year, very old team. But then, things just kind of deflated, and then Devin Leary got hurt. And then the next, they're playing 4 different quarterbacks, which is almost unheard of in college football. It was almost, in a way, it was kind of like a minor miracle that they won as many games as they did last year. And then this year, once people just realized, oh, this offense, like, who's the playmakers? Who can make something happen? Who could, so Kevin Concepcion, a freshman wide receiver from Charlotte, he is good. He'll be really good, but that's just one player. And that's the one guy. Okay, Clemson will do everything they can to try to take him away, right? Well, then who else does it? And that's kind of where NC State is, where they don't have that second, third receiver. They don't have the tight end. They don't have, the running backs that are going to scare opposing defenses. And it really all came together in that Louisville loss, where it's like, okay, Brennan Armstrong, we need a spark. It was basically what Doran said. I think Doran has a lot of respect for Brennan Armstrong, appreciates him, but the offense was just so inept that night and struggled in so many different ways that I think he had to turn to MJ Morris, and see what he could do. And the tough part with the Morris thing is, like, he could have been their quarterback in 2026. They wanted to redshirt him, and then he'd be a 3-year starter. And then he'd be the guy in 2026 as a 5th-year senior, in theory, if everything went right. And he's good, and he develops all that good stuff. Well, obviously now he will not be the quarterback in 2026. It'll be somebody else, maybe current senior commit in high school, Cedric Bailey, or, quarterback in the portal to be named later. But it just shows you, like, it's even hard to think ahead to upcoming seasons when, things like, like just a simple thing of, like, oh, gotta switch to MJ Morris in the middle of the season. So that's what I have no idea what NC State will look like on offense Saturday. I don't. The
feeling is mutual.
The only thing I've clung to is that, and I'll leave you on this, and I don't know when it'll happen, and maybe Virginia was proof of it against North Carolina, and I think Pittsburgh beat somebody they weren't supposed to win against. But State always has that pour it out game. Like that one game where everything goes right. I think when maybe Sammy Watkins was a freshman, he missed the game with an injury, but it was that day where everything went right. I want to say the score was something like 30-something to whatever.
30-13, I think.
Yeah, but if you watch that game, everything went right. Even if Sammy had played, it was just that day where everything went right. And I'm not saying that's happening this Saturday, but whether it's against a UNC or whoever, I still think they got that pour it out game in them. Just who knows when it will be, because that's college football. Everybody, every team seems to have that one game where it all goes right. And State hasn't, they scored 48 against Marshall, but that was a different kind of game. I wouldn't call that a pour it out game. So we'll see. At some point it will happen, I'm guessing. Who knows when. So
All right, Jim.
Well, thank you very much.
Pour it out game. Here we go. No,
Well, apparently if Clemson scores more than 24 points, that's a pour it out game.
That's right.
Later.
Looking forward to it.